I want to give a quick shout out to my patrons. Thank you so much for your support. Hey y'all, it's Kay from the Literary Apothecary, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to give you a book review for Interview with the Vampire, but I'm also going to do a short TV series review and a movie review, and then a quick comparison between the three. I've been really excited about this video, and I can't wait for y'all to see it. I hope you enjoy it, and let me know if there's other books, movies, TV shows, whatnot that you would like me to cover on this channel, because this was so much fun to do. So first, a spoiler-free summary of kind of what Interview with the Vampire is. I should say that this is a spoiler-free summary of book 1 in the Anne Rice series titled Interview with the Vampire. So we are in a small room with the vampire face to face as he speaks, as Louis, pours out the hypnotic, shocking, moving, and erotically charged confessions of his first 200 years as one of the living dead. Our main players in this book include Louis, Lestat, Claudia, the boy who's doing the interview, and Armand. Of course, we have other players along the book, in the movie, in the TV series, but these are the main ones. So a spoiler-free summary of Interview with the Vampire, the book by Anne Rice. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. Wow, I knew that I was gonna like this book and maybe even love it, but I was not expecting to love it as much as I did. I was totally swept away with Louis' story and the romanticism of vampires and all the emotions and all that took place in this book. Yes, it was a bit melodramatic, but they're vampires, they're melodramatic. I loved the characters. Each one to me was so individual that you knew their distinct voices and their actions and who was doing what at what time. And a lot of times why they were doing what they were doing. So let's talk about the chapters. While there are page breaks and parts in the book, there aren't necessarily distinct chapters. And usually this would annoy me to no end because I am a reader that I usually try to read per chapter, so I pause when a chapter ends and then I switch to another book, because as you know, I usually have at least a couple going at one time. With this book, there were some page breaks, there was parts, but there weren't distinct chapters. It's kind of like reading a Terry Pratchett book in that sense. But in this case, it didn't bother me as much because I feel like it worked for the story. It worked in the medium that Anne Rice was writing. It felt like an interview. If it was broken up into chapters, it wouldn't feel as much like the interview that it was supposed to feel like. So I thought it worked for the story it was telling. Just recently, AMC came out with a new TV series that was based off of mostly book 1, but with a few influences and material from later books, and I'll get to that kind of stuff in just a second. So quick review of the TV series. I'm not used to doing these kinds of reviews, so forgive me. So I gave the TV series 4.5 out of 5 stars. I thought it was highly entertaining. For an entertainment standpoint, 5 out of 5 stars. There was fantastic acting. They captured the essence and personality of the characters, I thought, in such a great, entertaining, and insightful way. A lot of the major differences, there are some very big differences from the TV series in the book, but I thought they made it work. Not sure how I feel about them using other books, but still going with the title of book 1. That's a little bit confusing for some people if they don't know about that going in. I knew that they had brought in some other source material from other books into this, so I wasn't as thrown off by it, but some may not like that. So I gave a 4.5 out of 5 stars. 5 stars definitely for the entertainment value. 4.5 stars because they weren't able to, for whatever reason, contain book 1 into season 1. Now let's talk about the I think it was 1994 movie version of this, starring Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt, Antonio Banderas, and a very young Kirsten Dunst. I gave this one 3 out of 5 stars. While for its day, it was alright. The story was, alright without knowing anything about the books. The first time I watched this movie, I thought it was great. But now looking back on it from 2022, I feel like it could have done better, but also could have done worse. They did stay closer to source materials in some of the big ways. I felt like Brad Pitt was able to capture the despair of Louis really well. But overall, I just thought it was okay. It wasn't completely terrible. It wasn't great. I might not watch it ever again, but I'm glad that I watched it again for a second time with the books in my mind this time. So that is where the spoiler-free section of this video is going to end. Next is going to have spoilers for book 1, also spoilers for the film and season 1 in the TV show. So if you haven't read this book yet and you don't want to be spoiled, thank you for watching, but put a pause on this, go read the book, and then come back. The stuff that I'm going to be talking about in this section of the video is strictly to book 1. There will be a very short bit at the end where I expand into other books that I've learned about through kind of research, reminding myself about this book. I went online and found a few articles with comparing differences and stuff, so I'll link those down in the description below also, so you can see where I got my material from. I used my own memory, my own observations, but also relying on other people to kind of fill in details of stuff I missed, stuff I didn't think about that I thought were important still to bring up. So let's talk first about the book to the film comparison. So first let's talk about Louis. In the book, Louis is of Creole descent with black hair. So he's got the darker skin with black hair. In the film, he's Brad Pitt, so he's Caucasian with blonde hair. Obviously, major differences there if anyone has read the book and remembered what Louis was supposed to look like. Now let's talk about Daniel, who was the interviewer in the book. In book 1, we just know him as the boy. He's young with blonde hair with violet eyes. Like I said, he's got no name in book 1. He's just known as the boy. In the film, he's played by Christian Slater, who I feel like is a little bit older than he was supposed to be from the book. Also has darker hair than I imagined, with I think brown eyes. And in the film, he has a name. We know him by name as Daniel Malloy. So how about Claudia? So in the book, Claudia is 6 years old with an adult mind, essentially. As the book goes on, her mind ages, but her appearance stays the same, just like vampires. In the film, she's a 12-year-old Kirsten Dunst, and I thought Kirsten Dunst portrayed her rather well, but the age differences were a bit different. Our next character up is someone that we get towards the end of the film. This is Armand. In the book, he's described as redhead with a cherub face. He's a teenager, Russian-born, raised in Italy. In the film, he's Antonio Banderas. Everyone knows Antonio Banderas looks like, sounds like, not Italian at all, not redheaded, not even Russian-born, complete opposite, basically. So next we have the sexuality. In the book, especially Louis and Lestat's sexuality is explored a little bit. It's hinted at times that they might be gay or bisexual. In the film, this is non-existent. The film, they don't even mention the sexuality. It's not even a question. The family dynamics. So in the book, it's kind of laid out like Lestat is the dad, Louis is the mom, Claudia is the child. They have this family dynamic going on. In the film, it's very different. It feels almost like they're trying to force Louis and Claudia being involved with each other, being in some kind of a romantic relationship together. And that's just weird. Let's talk about Louis's grief. Speaking of Louis, so in the book, Louis is grieving his brother who has committed suicide. In the film, we learn that Louis had a wife and child that he's grieving. We don't know anything about how they died, who they were, anything about them, just that he's been grieving them for some time. We don't even know how long he has been grieving them. Lestat's ability to fly. So in the book, we don't get any of this in the first book. There's no mention of Lestat being able to fly. In the film, we actually get this pretty early on when he turns Louis. So let's talk about their tears now. We're almost to the end of this comparison. So their tears. In the book, the vampires cry blood. In the film, they just cry normal tears. So are they even vampires? And then the last comparison that I have for the book to the film is Daniel being turned. So we don't get this at all in the first book. In the book, it ends with essentially the interview just ending. From what I remember, if any of this is incorrect, please let me know, because like I said, I've done this from memory and it might not be 100% accurate, but I think it is. In the film, Lestat turns Daniel at the very end, or at least it's hinted at, because he comes and jumps in the car as Daniel's driving and bites his neck. I think we're to assume that he, has turned Daniel at that point. So, y'all know how much a fan I am of at least the first season of the TV series. So let's talk about differences between the book and the TV series. Usually when there's a adaptation, my brain knocks things down because of the differences. But this one, I felt like it could stand on its own. But there are some major differences. So one of the biggest differences is the time period that this takes place. In the book, Louis was turned in 1791. In the TV series, they jumped ahead to 1910. We also have a big difference in Louis himself. So he's got the bright, essentially skin color in that sense. In the book, he is a wealthy plantation owner. I believe he inherited the plantation house from his family. In the TV show, he's a savvy black business owner in New Orleans, which, given that it's 1910, is a huge deal, and it allows the producers and the screenwriters to build on a lot of different topics other than just being a vampire. The order of events was also different. So in the book, Lestat finds Louis after Louis's brother's death. In the TV series, they already know each other. In fact, Lestat has met Louis's family, has met the brother, and Louis actually confronts Lestat and asks him if he was responsible for his brother's death. Louis's reason for turning, going along with those ideas, in the book, it's essentially to shake off grief from his brother's death. In the show, because we're dealing with the early 1900s in America and racism and all of that, it's more to shake off the society than it is to shake off the grief. Claudia. So in the book, like we've said before, Claudia is a young kid, about 6 years old. I believe she's Caucasian. In the TV show, she's a teenager and she's black like Louis, which both of those changes allow, like I said, producers to explore a lot more different ideas than they would have if she was a white 6-year-old kid. So the interview itself is very different. In the book, the interview takes place in the 1970s in San Francisco, and there's only Louis and the boy present, and it only happens once. In the TV show, the interview that we're seeing takes place in 2022, so this year in Dubai. We see a lot of other people present during this. This is the second interview with Louis and Daniel. Daniel is older and different, which I'll get to in just a minute. Also, we have Lestat being able to fly again. Like I said before, we don't get this in book 1, and in TV series, Lestat flies at the very end of season 1 when he's having a row. Very, very serious, scary, intense fight with Louis, which they have an argument in the book. They have many arguments in the book, but it never turns physical. So there's another difference where this is the first time that we see physical fights, physical arguments between Louis and Lestat, where in the book they're just verbal. They never get physical like that. And then the last difference between the book and the TV show that I wrote down is, of course, Daniel. So in the book, he's younger and eager to prove himself as a journalist. In the TV show, since this is the second interview he's doing with Louis, he's older, he's got immunocompromised disease, but he still travels during the pandemic. So this takes place in 2022, so they do mention the COVID pandemic and all that surrounds that. And Louis mentions, kind of questions Daniel's judgment that he's immunocompromised, yet he's international traveling during a worldwide pandemic. Daniel also at this point has a successful career, but he hasn't yet published the interview. So from what I remember in the book, at the end of the book, he essentially goes on to publish the interview with Louis. In the TV show, this is the second interview is kind of his chance to publish this. So now I'm going to pause for a second and mention that I only have a few more notes here, and these are going to give away spoilers for the rest of the series beyond book 1. These are things that I myself were spoiled when I was doing research for this video, but I thought were interesting notes and helpful to know. So first, on the topic of Daniel, in the book, we don't learn his name until later, of course. Later books, I think it's book 3, book 2, or book 3. And when we learn his name, his last name is spelled Molloy. And in book 3, that's an important note. In just a second, I'll get to that. And he's turned by Armand in book 3, which is a very interesting development. In the film, his last name is spelled Malloy, so they changed the spelling of it in the film for some reason. And in the film, like I've said before, it's suggested that he's turned by Lestat and not Armand. And then lastly, Lestat's past. So in book 1, we don't learn about Lestat's past. We don't get this until book 2 and 3, which are mostly about Lestat himself. In the TV series, we get his past and we get the story of when he was turned vampire. I think it was just about halfway through the series, halfway through the season. So we learn about Lestat's background fairly early on. I think to build some sympathy for Lestat, maybe. But anyways, so that's my reviews of Interview with the Vampire, my comparison videos, all in one video. This is a little bit of a stumbling mess because I haven't done one of these videos before. But let me know in the comments below if you've read the books, seen the movie, seen the TV show. What one do you prefer? Although I love Anne Rice's writing, I actually think I would go with it. The TV show is better in this sense. That's just my personal preferences. I thought that the story they told of Louis in 1910 played better to the vampiric story and story that Anne Rice was trying to get at. Yeah, let me know in the comments below which one you prefer. Let me know if there's any major differences that I missed, or if I said anything that you think is incorrect. As always, my Patreon and my Discord information will be in the description below. Keep reading, and I love you all to the moon and back. Bye.